The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday afternoon, October 15th, 2019, turning the streets of Portland, Oregon, into rivers of gray water. 9-year-old Emma Matthews pulled her backpack higher on her shoulders and quickened her pace through the familiar alley behind Franklin Street. It was her secret shortcut home from Riverside Elementary School, a path her mother didn't exactly approve of, but one that shaved 10 minutes off her walk. The alley was narrow and lined with dumpsters from the restaurants on the main street. Usually, it smelled like old cooking oil and rotting vegetables, especially on rainy days when the odors intensified. Emma had learned to breathe through her mouth during this part of her journey. But today, something was different. Today, there was a sound cutting through the steady drumming of rain on metal dumpsters. A whimper. Soft, desperate, and utterly heartbreaking. Emma stopped dead in her tracks, her worn sneakers splashing in a puddle. She tilted her head, listening. There it was again, a pitiful crying that sounded like it came from something small and hurt. Her heart began to race. She'd always had a soft spot for animals. Her bedroom walls were covered with posters of puppies and kittens, and she'd been begging her parents for a dog for 3 years straight. But they'd always said no dogs were expensive, required too much time, too much responsibility. "Hello?" Emma called out softly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Is someone there?" The whimpering grew slightly louder, more urgent. It was coming from behind the large green dumpster near the back door of Chung's Chinese restaurant. Emma's grandmother had always warned her about going near dumpsters. "You never know what you might find," she'd say ominously. But something stronger than fear pulled Emma forward. She crept closer, her heart pounding in her chest. As she peered around the corner of the dumpster, her breath caught in her throat. There, pressed against the cold brick wall and trying desperately to stay dry under a tiny overhang, was the most pitiful dog she had ever seen. He wasn't a big dog, maybe 20 pounds at most, though it was hard to tell under all that matted, muddy fur. His coat should have been white and brown, Emma guessed, but right now it was mostly just gray with filth. The poor creature was shaking violently, whether from cold or fear, Emma couldn't tell. Probably both. His ribs protruded sharply through his thin coat, each bone clearly visible. One of his ears stood straight up, while the other flopped down, giving him a lopsided appearance that might have been cute under different circumstances. But it was his paw that made Emma gasp. His right front paw was injured, blood mixing with the rainwater and creating small pink puddles beneath him. The wound looked infected, swollen and angry. The dog had been holding it up, trying not to put weight on it. When the dog noticed Emma, he didn't bark or growl. He simply looked at her with the most soulful brown eyes she had ever seen, eyes that held more emotion than she thought possible in an animal. They were filled with fear, yes, but also with something else. Hope. A desperate, dying ember of hope that maybe, just maybe, this human would be different from all the others who had passed him by. "Oh, you poor baby," Emma whispered, her own eyes filling with tears that mixed with the rain on her cheeks. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She slowly crouched down, making herself smaller, less threatening. She'd read enough books about dogs to know you shouldn't make sudden movements around scared animals. The dog watched her carefully, his whole body still trembling. He didn't run, but Emma could see he was ready to bolt if she made one wrong move. "I'm Emma," she said softly, extending her hand very slowly, palm down, the way her friend's dog trainer had shown her once. "You're safe now. I promise." The dog sniffed cautiously at her hand, his wet nose cold against her fingers. Then, with what seemed like the last of his strength, he leaned forward just slightly and licked her hand. That one small gesture of trust broke Emma's heart completely. Without thinking about the consequences, without worrying about what her mother would say, Without considering the mud and the smell and the blood, Emma did the only thing that felt right. She quickly unzipped her favorite jacket, the purple one with butterfly patches that her grandmother had given her for her last birthday, and wrapped it around the shivering dog. "Come here, sweetie," she murmured, carefully scooping the dog into her arms. He was lighter than she expected, all bones and almost no muscle. He didn't resist. He simply didn't have the energy left to fight. Instead, he nestled into her arms, tucking his muddy head under her chin, and let out a long, shuddering sigh that felt like relief. As Emma stood up, cradling the broken creature against her chest, feeling his rapid heartbeat against her own, she made a silent promise to him and to herself. She was going to save this dog, no matter what it took. She didn't know his story, how he'd ended up alone, injured, and starving in a dirty alley. She didn't know if anyone was looking for him, or if he'd been abandoned. She didn't know if her parents would let her keep him, or if they could even afford to help him. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was the moment her life changed forever. As she turned toward home, holding the dog close, protecting him from the rain with her own body, Emma Matthews became a girl with a purpose. And the nameless, broken stray dog pressed against her heart became something more than just a lost animal. He became Charlie. He became hope. He became the beginning of a miracle that neither of them could possibly imagine. The rain continued to fall as Emma hurried home, but she barely noticed it anymore. All she could feel was the warmth of the dog in her arms and the fierce determination burning in her chest. 3 blocks. She just had to make it 3 blocks, and then the real challenge would begin, convincing her parents that this was meant to be. As if sensing her thoughts, the dog Charlie, she'd already decided to call him Charlie after her late grandfather, who'd always been so kind, let out a soft whimper and burrowed deeper into her arms. Emma held him tighter, quickening her pace. "Hold on, Charlie," she whispered. "We're almost home. You're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay." She had no idea how prophetic those words would become. She had no idea that the dog she was saving would one day save her right back in the most extraordinary way possible. All she knew in that moment was that fate had brought them together in a rainy alley, and she wasn't going to let him down. Behind them, the alley looked the same as it always had, just dumpsters and rain and shadows. But for Emma and Charlie, everything had changed. Their story was just beginning, and it would become one that would touch hundreds of lives, make national news, and prove that sometimes the most broken things can become the most beautiful. But first, they had to make it home. First, they had to survive what came next. Emma turned the corner onto Maple Street, her house now visible just 2 blocks away. Her heart raced with anxiety and excitement. In her arms, Charlie's shivering had lessened slightly, as if he somehow knew he was finally safe. The real adventure was about to begin. Sarah Matthews was standing at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables for dinner, when she heard the front door burst open with unusual force. She looked up, expecting to see her daughter's backpack hit the floor in the usual after-school routine. Instead, what she saw made her drop her knife with a clatter. Emma stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, her favorite purple jacket missing, and cradled in her arms was what appeared to be a mud-covered, trembling bundle of fur. The smell hit Sarah immediately, a mixture of wet dog, infection, and something worse she couldn't quite identify. "Emma Louise Matthews, what on earth?" Sarah started, her voice rising with shock. "Mom, please." Emma's voice cracked with desperation, tears streaming down her already rain-soaked face. "Please don't say no. Not yet. Just look at him, please." Sarah's maternal instincts were at war. Part of her wanted to immediately reject this dirty, probably disease-carrying stray animal that her daughter had brought into their home. They'd had the no pets conversation 100 times. Dogs were expensive. They required time, attention, veterinary care they could barely afford. Tom had just taken a pay cut at work. They were already stretching every dollar. But then she really looked. She looked past the mud and the smell and saw the pitiful creature in her daughter's arms. The dog's ribs were showing through matted fur. One paw was clearly injured, blood still seeping from an infected wound. His eyes, those heartbreaking brown eyes, looked up at her with a mixture of terror and exhausted hope. And her daughter. Her sweet, sensitive Emma was looking at her with an expression Sarah had never quite seen before. It wasn't just pleading. It was purpose. It was determination mixed with compassion so pure it made Sarah's throat tighten. "He was dying, Mom," Emma said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears. Behind the dumpster on Franklin Street, all alone in the rain. I couldn't just leave him there. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, feeling her resolve crumbling. She thought about turning away a suffering animal, about teaching her daughter that sometimes it was easier to look away from pain than to help. Was that really the lesson she wanted to impart? "Tom," Sarah called out, her voice strained. "Tom, you need to come here. Right now." Emma's father emerged from his home office, reading glasses still perched on his nose, looking annoyed at the interruption. His expression changed immediately when he saw the scene before him. "What in the world?" "Dad, please," Emma interrupted before he could finish. "I found him in the alley. He's hurt. He needs help." For a long moment, Tom just stared. Sarah watched her husband's face go through the same internal battle she'd just experienced. They made eye contact across the kitchen, a silent conversation happening between them. They both knew what they should say. They both knew the practical, responsible answer. "We need to at least get him checked," Tom finally said, rubbing his face with his hands. "We can't just let him suffer." 20 minutes later, they were rushing through the doors of Riverside Animal Clinic, the closest emergency veterinary office. Dr. Jessica Chun, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and steady hands, took one look at the dog and immediately ushered them into an examination room. "How long has he been like this?" Dr. Chun asked, her fingers gently probing the dog's body while speaking in soothing tones. "I just found him," Emma said, refusing to let go of the dog's paw. "Maybe an hour ago." Dr. Chun worked in focused silence, her expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. She checked the dog's temperature, listened to his heart, examined his infected paw, and looked into his eyes and ears. Finally, she stepped back and faced the Matthews family. "This is a terrier mix, probably about 3 years old," she began, her voice professional but compassionate. "He's severely malnourished. I'd estimate he's lost at least 30 to 40% of his body weight. The paw injury is badly infected and needs immediate treatment with antibiotics. He's dehydrated, has possible internal parasites, and shows signs of prolonged neglect and exposure." Sarah felt Tom tense beside her. She knew he was calculating costs in his head. Without treatment, he won't make it more than a few days, maybe a week at most, Dr. Chun continued. "With treatment, he has an excellent chance of full recovery. But I need to be honest with you, this won't be cheap. Initial treatment, medication, tests, and a week of hospitalization. We're looking at approximately $800. The number hung in the air like a weight. $800. That was groceries for a month and a half. That was the money they'd been saving for new tires for the car. That was impossible. Tom opened his mouth, and Sarah knew what he was going to say. She could see him preparing to explain that they simply couldn't afford it, that they'd have to take the dog to a shelter, that maybe someone else could help. But Emma spoke first. "I have money," she said suddenly, her voice small but determined. She looked up at her parents with fierce resolve. "My allowance." I've been saving it for 2 years. I was going to buy a new bike, but I don't need a bike. I need to help him. Emma, honey, Sarah started gently, her heart breaking at her daughter's sacrifice. I have $287 in my piggy bank at home. Emma continued, speaking faster now, as if afraid they'd stop her. It's mine. I earned it. I can use it however I want, right? That's what you always told me, that saving money means you can use it for what's important. She looked down at the dog, who had somehow found enough strength to rest his head in her lap. And he's important, Mom. He's really, really important. Dr. Chun had tears in her eyes now. Even her veterinary assistant, a young man named Marcus, who'd seen countless animals come through these doors, had to look away. Sarah looked at Tom. Tom looked at Sarah. In that moment, without speaking a word, they both knew they'd already lost this battle. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd won something far more valuable. That's quite a sacrifice for a stranger, young lady, Dr. Chun said softly, kneeling down to Emma's level. Emma shook her head firmly. He's not a stranger anymore. His name is Charlie. After my grandpa Charlie, who died last year. Grandpa always said that being kind was more important than being comfortable. Tom let out a long breath and ran his hand through his hair, his tail. When he was about to make a decision, he knew he'd probably regret but couldn't help making anyway. Okay, Emma, you contribute your savings. Your mother and I will figure out the rest. Tom, Sarah started, but he squeezed her hand. We'll make it work, he said quietly. We always do. And besides, he looked down at Emma, who was now openly crying tears of relief while clutching Charlie's paw. How can we say no to that? Dr. Chun smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been hoping for exactly this outcome. I'll tell you what. I'm going to knock off $200 for the bravest little girl I've met in a long time. And we'll set up a payment plan for the rest. Marcus, let's get this warrior started on fluids and antibiotics immediately. As they prepared Charlie for his overnight stay, Emma leaned close to the dog's ear. You're going to be okay now, Charlie. I promise. You're safe. You're loved. And I'm going to visit you every single day until you come home with us. Charlie, despite his weakened state, managed to lick her cheek once. It was the first spark of the loyalty that would one day save Emma's life. Tom wrapped his arm around Sarah's shoulders as they watched their daughter refuse to leave the dog's side until Dr. Chun absolutely insisted they needed to start treatment. Did we just adopt a dog? He asked quietly. Sarah wiped her eyes. I think the dog adopted us. Or maybe Emma adopted all of us into something bigger than we realized. As they finally convinced Emma to head home with promises that they'd return first thing in the morning, none of them could have imagined the incredible journey they'd just begun. The stray dog they'd scraped together money to save would, in less than a year, become the reason their daughter would still be alive. But tonight, all that mattered was that Charlie would survive. That Emma had shown them what true compassion looked like. And that sometimes, the best decisions in life are the ones that don't make financial sense, but make every other kind of sense that matters. The Matthews family drove home in thoughtful silence, each of them processing what had just happened. In a hospital cage at the clinic, Charlie finally closed his eyes, warm, safe, and loved for the first time in months. 2 lives had just saved each other. The miracle was only beginning. Emma couldn't eat breakfast the next morning. Her stomach was twisted in knots of anticipation and worry. What if Charlie had gotten worse overnight? What if he was scared without her there? What if he thought she'd abandoned him, like whoever had left him in that alley? Emma, you need to eat something, Sarah said gently, pushing a plate of scrambled eggs toward her daughter. I can't, Mom. We need to go see him. I promised him I'd come back. Tom looked up from his coffee, his eyes softening. "Give me 10 minutes to get dressed. We'll go before school." The drive to Riverside Animal Clinic felt like it took hours instead of 15 minutes. Emma pressed her face against the car window, her breath fogging the glass. She'd barely slept, lying awake thinking about Charlie, wondering if he was comfortable, if he was in pain, if he knew that someone finally cared about him. When they finally walked through the clinic doors, Dr. Chun greeted them with a smile that immediately eased some of Emma's anxiety. "He made it through the night beautifully. In fact, I think someone's been waiting for you." She led them to the recovery room, and Emma gasped. Charlie was in a large crate with clean blankets, an IV line in his front leg, and his injured paw wrapped in bright blue bandages. But the most incredible thing was his tail. The moment he saw Emma, that tail started wagging slowly at first, then faster, as if it had forgotten how but was remembering. "Charlie." Emma rushed to the crate, and Dr. Chun opened it carefully. The dog struggled to his feet, wobbly but determined, and pressed himself against the bars to reach Emma's outstretched hands. He licked her fingers frantically, whimpering with joy. "I told you I'd come back," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I told you I wouldn't leave you." For the next 7 days, this became their routine. Every morning before school, Emma visited Charlie. Every afternoon, she rushed straight from the bus stop to the clinic. She'd sit beside his crate for hours, reading him her favorite books, Where the Red Fern Grows, Because of Winn-Dixie, and Charlotte's Web. She told him about her day, her friends, her dreams. And Charlie listened to every word, his brown eyes never leaving her face. Dr. Chun watched their bond grow with professional amazement. "I've been a veterinarian for 18 years, she told Sarah one afternoon, "and I've never seen anything quite like this. That dog was completely shut down when you brought him in, barely responsive, totally traumatized. But with Emma, it's like he's a completely different animal." On the 7th day, Dr. Chun gave them the news they'd been waiting for. "Charlie's ready to go home." The transformation was remarkable. The skeletal, mud-covered creature from the alley was gone. In his place was a clean, bright-eyed dog with fluffy brown and white fur, one ear up and one ear down, and a personality starting to emerge. He was still thin, but gaining weight steadily. His paw was healing perfectly. And most importantly, the fear in his eyes had been replaced with something else entirely: trust. When they brought Charlie home that October afternoon, something magical began to unfold in the Matthews household. Charlie didn't just become Emma's dog. He became her shadow, her guardian, her constant companion. Every morning, he walked with Emma and Tom to the bus stop 3 blocks away. He'd sit patiently on the sidewalk, watching until the yellow bus pulled away and Emma's face disappeared from the window. Then he'd walk home with Tom, where he'd spend the day mostly sleeping on Emma's bed, surrounded by her scent. But at 3:15 p.m., every single day without fail, Charlie would position himself at the living room window. Sarah would watch in amazement as the dog seemed to know, down to the minute, when Emma's bus would appear around the corner. His tail would start wagging before the bus was even visible. The moment the doors opened and Emma stepped out, Charlie would let out a joyful bark and race to the door, waiting impatiently for her to come inside. "It's like he has an internal clock, specifically set to Emma time," Tom joked one evening. But it was more than just routine. It was devotion. It was the kind of bond that transcends the typical pet-owner relationship and becomes something deeper, something almost spiritual. Emma, who had struggled with crippling anxiety since 2nd grade, began to change too. The girl who used to have panic attacks before school presentations, who ate lunch alone in the library because social situations overwhelmed her, who would sometimes call her mother crying from the school nurse's office, that girl was evolving. It started small. Emma joined the school's animal welfare club, something she never would have had the confidence to do before. At the first meeting, she stood up and told Charlie's story. Her voice shook at first, but as she talked about finding him in the alley, about his recovery, about the miracle of rescue and second chances, something inside her strengthened. "We always think rescue is about us saving them," Emma told her classmates, her voice growing steadier. "But sometimes they rescue us right back." A club advisor, Mrs. Patterson, was so moved that she helped Emma organize a fundraiser for the Portland Animal Shelter. Emma, who would have been terrified to take on such a project 6 months earlier, threw herself into planning. She created posters, organized a bake sale, and even convinced local businesses to donate items for a raffle. The fundraiser took place on a cold Saturday in February, and Emma stood at a table in front of the grocery store, Charlie sitting proudly beside her in a vest that said, "Adopt, don't shop." She told their story to anyone who would listen. Some people walked by quickly, uncomfortable with the young girl's earnest pitch. But many stopped, many listened, and many donated. By the end of the day, Emma and her classmates had raised $1,247 for the shelter. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," Sarah said that evening, watching Emma count and recount the donation money at the kitchen table. "You know what this means? You've helped save other dogs, just like we saved Charlie." But Charlie had saved something too, though they didn't fully understand it yet. On nights when Emma's anxiety attacked, when her chest would tighten, her breath would come in gasps, and the world would feel too big and too scary. Charlie seemed to sense it before Emma herself did. He'd jump onto her bed, carefully position himself directly over her racing heart, and rest his head on her chest. Then he'd breathe. Slow, deep, deliberate breaths. Emma found herself matching his rhythm, her own breathing slowing, her heartbeat steadying. His weight was grounding. His warmth was comforting. His presence was everything. "It's like he knows," Emma told her mother one night after Charlie had calmed one of her episodes. "It's like he can feel when I'm scared." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, watching the dog who refused to leave Emma's side. "Maybe he does know. Maybe he remembers what it felt like to be scared and alone, and he doesn't want you to ever feel that way." The months passed. Charlie filled out. His coat became glossy and full. His energy returned. But his devotion to Emma never wavered. He was her alarm clock in the morning, gently licking her face to wake her. He was her walking companion, matching his pace to hers perfectly. He was her study buddy, lying at her feet while she did homework. He was her protector, positioning himself between her and any stranger who approached. Teachers at school noticed the change in Emma. She participated more in class. She made new friends. She smiled more easily. Her mother noticed she was sleeping better, eating better, laughing more. The therapy sessions for her anxiety, which had been weekly for 2 years, were scaled back to monthly. "Has something changed at home?" Emma's therapist, Dr. Morrison, asked during one session. Emma thought about it seriously. "I guess I'm not as scared anymore. I have Charlie now. And if he can be brave after everything he went through, then I can be brave too." By the time spring arrived, bringing cherry blossoms and longer days, Emma Matthews was almost unrecognizable from the anxious, withdrawn girl who'd found a dying dog in an alley 6 months earlier. And Charlie was unrecognizable from the broken, terrified stray who'd been given one last chance at life. They had saved each other in every way possible. They had formed a bond that everyone who saw them could feel, something rare and precious and unbreakable. But neither Emma nor Charlie knew that their bond was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. Neither knew that Charlie's incredible senses were already detecting something wrong, something dangerous, something that would require him to repay Emma's kindness in the most extraordinary way possible. The miracle that had begun in a rainy alley was building towards something bigger. Something that would save Emma's life and change hundreds of others. But for now, on this perfect spring evening, with Emma reading on her bed and Charlie curled up beside her, his head resting on her leg, everything was exactly as it should be. They were home. They were safe. They were loved. And they were ready for whatever came next, though neither of them knew just how much courage that would require. March 2020 arrived with an unsettling heaviness that went beyond the emerging news of a pandemic spreading across the world. For the Matthews family, the strangest thing wasn't the talk of lockdowns and social distancing, it was Charlie's behavior. It started subtly. Emma, now 10 years old, had been feeling unusually tired for several weeks. She'd come home from school and immediately want to nap, which wasn't like her at all. She'd lost her appetite, picking at meals that used to be her favorites. Sarah attributed it to stress. The news was frightening. Schools were talking about potentially closing, and Emma had always been sensitive to world events. "It's just the anxiety acting up again," Tom reasoned one evening, watching Emma push her spaghetti around her plate. "Everything's so uncertain right now. It's affecting all of us." But Charlie knew something they didn't, and he was desperately trying to tell them. The first real sign came on a Tuesday morning in mid-March. Emma was getting ready for school, pulling on her favorite hoodie, when Charlie did something he'd never done before. He jumped up, placed both paws on her chest, and pushed. Hard. Emma stumbled backward, surprised. "Charlie, bad dog. What are you doing?" she scolded. But Charlie didn't look guilty. He looked frantic. His ears were back, his eyes were wide, and he immediately jumped up again, pawing at the left side of her chest with an urgency that bordered on aggressive. "Mom," Emma called out, unnerved. "Something's wrong with Charlie." Sarah came running, finding Charlie desperately pawing at Emma, whining in a way he never had before. She pulled the dog away gently. "Charlie, no. Down. What's gotten into you?" Over the next few days, Charlie's behavior became increasingly bizarre and distressing. He refused to leave Emma's side, even for a moment. When she went to the bathroom, he scratched at the door. When she tried to go upstairs to bed, he would block her path, standing firmly at the bottom of the stairs and barking until one of her parents came to investigate. Most concerning was his fixation on Emma's chest. Several times a day, Charlie would rear up and paw, specifically at the left side of her chest, just below her collarbone. Always the same spot. Always with the same desperate urgency. It was as if he was trying to dig something out of her. "This isn't normal," Sarah told Tom on March 18th, the day Oregon announced school closures. "He's obsessed. Maybe he's sick? Or maybe the stress of everything happening is affecting him too." They took Charlie to Dr. Chun for a checkup. The veterinarian examined him, thoroughly checked his heart, his lungs, his neurological responses. Everything was perfect. Charlie was in excellent health. "Has anything changed at home?" Dr. Chun asked, stroking Charlie's head as he sat perfectly still on the examination table. "Just the pandemic stress," Sarah explained. "And Emma's been tired lately, but we think that's just anxiety about everything going on in the world." Dr. Chun nodded thoughtfully. Dogs can pick up on stress and anxiety. Sometimes they act out when their owners are struggling emotionally. Try to maintain routine as much as possible. It should pass. But it didn't pass. It got worse. By the end of March, with the family now in full lockdown, Charlie's behavior had become almost unbearable. He followed Emma like a shadow, but an agitated, desperate shadow. He barely ate. He paced constantly. And several times a day, he would paw at that exact same spot on Emma's chest with an intensity that sometimes left small scratches on her skin. "Charlie, stop it." Emma would cry, pushing him away. "You're hurting me." The hurt in her voice would make Charlie back off for a moment, but within minutes, he'd be back, pawing, whining, his eyes pleading with them to understand something they couldn't grasp. Sarah started to lose patience. "Maybe we need to call a dog behaviorist," she told Tom one night in late March. "This is getting out of control. Emma's getting scared of him." That thought that Emma might become afraid of Charlie, the dog who had healed her anxiety and given her so much confidence, broke Sarah's heart. But she didn't know what else to do. Emma herself was confused and hurt. Her best friend, her constant companion, the dog she'd saved and who had saved her right back, was acting like a stranger. Sometimes she'd catch Charlie staring at her with such intensity, such distress in his eyes, that it made her chest tighten with worry. And that's when she noticed it. One evening in early April, Emma was changing into her pajamas when she happened to glance down at her chest. She pressed her hand against the spot where Charlie always pawed the left side, just below her collarbone. There was a slight discomfort there, a tenderness she hadn't noticed before. Or maybe she had noticed and had been ignoring it, thinking it was just from Charlie's constant pawing. She pressed a little harder and felt something beneath the skin. Something small and firm. A hardness that didn't feel like it should be there. Emma's breath caught. She pressed again, trying to convince herself she was imagining it. But it was there. Definitely there. A small lump, maybe the size of a grape, beneath her skin. Fear flooded through her. She quickly pulled her pajama top on and climbed into bed, her heart racing. Charlie immediately jumped up beside her, and for once, his presence didn't calm her, because he positioned himself exactly as he always did now, with his paw resting on that spot. That specific spot where Emma had just felt something that shouldn't be there. "What is it, Charlie?" Emma whispered into the darkness. "What are you trying to tell me?" Charlie whined softly and pressed his paw more firmly against her chest, as if to say, This right here. Please pay attention to this." Emma lay awake for hours that night, her mind racing. Should she tell her parents? What if it was nothing? What if she was just being anxious, letting the pandemic stress and Charlie's weird behavior make her imagine problems that didn't exist? The lump was probably just a swollen lymph node or something. People got those all the time, didn't they? But a small voice in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded a lot like intuition, or maybe like Charlie's desperate whining, kept saying, "What if it's not nothing?" The next morning, April 3rd, Emma woke to find Charlie doing something that finally made her parents understand that something was seriously wrong. She was still asleep when it happened, but Sarah would later tell her every detail. At exactly 6 a.m., Charlie started barking. Not his usual bark, this was different. Louder, more frantic, more desperate. It was the bark of a dog who had tried everything else and was now out of options. It was the bark of a dog who knew that time was running out. Sarah rushed to Emma's room, ready to scold Charlie for waking everyone up so early. But what she found stopped her in her tracks. Charlie was standing on Emma's bed, barking directly at her sleeping daughter's chest. Between barks, he would paw at that same spot, then bark again, and look at Sarah as if to say, "Do you see it now? Do you finally understand?" "Charlie, quiet," Sarah hissed, but the dog ignored her completely. Then he did something that changed everything. Charlie grabbed the hem of Sarah's nightgown with his teeth gently but firmly and pulled. He pulled her toward the bed, toward Emma, toward that spot on her chest he'd been trying to tell them about for weeks. Sarah's irritation transformed into something else. Concern, confusion, and then, as she really looked at Charlie's eyes, those intelligent, desperate, pleading eyes, a cold realization began to creep over her. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. "What are you trying to show me?" Charlie immediately placed his paw on Emma's chest. That exact spot. He looked at Sarah and whined, a sound so full of anguish it made her eyes well with tears. Sarah sat down on the edge of Emma's bed and gently placed her hand where Charlie's paw had been. Emma stirred but didn't wake. And there, beneath Sarah's fingers, she felt it. A small, hard lump. Her blood ran cold. "Emma," Sarah said softly, her voice shaking. "Emma, honey, wake up." Emma's eyes fluttered open. "Mom? What's wrong?" Sarah's hand was trembling as she kept it pressed against Emma's chest. "Sweetheart, is there something here? Have you noticed anything unusual? Any pain or discomfort?" Emma's face flushed. I felt something last night. I was going to tell you, but I thought maybe it was just from Charlie scratching me. And we're going to the doctor," Sarah said firmly, standing up. "Today, right now, Tom." As her parents rushed around making phone calls and getting dressed, Emma sat on her bed with Charlie pressed against her side. She wrapped her arms around him and buried her face in his fur. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. "You've been trying to tell us. I'm so sorry we didn't listen sooner." "I'm so sorry, Charlie." Charlie licked her face and rested his head over her heart, as if trying to protect it, to protect her from whatever danger he'd sensed. Neither of them knew yet just how much danger Emma was really in. Neither knew that Charlie's desperate warnings had been the difference between life and death. But they were about to find out. Dr. Maria Rodriguez had been the Matthews family physician for 7 years. She'd treated Emma's ear infections, her sprained ankle from gymnastics, her annual checkups. She was warm, thorough, and never dismissed a parent's concerns. But when Sarah called her office at 7:30 a.m. on that Friday morning in April, demanding an emergency appointment and barely able to keep her voice steady, Dr. Rodriguez heard something in Sarah's tone that made her clear her schedule immediately. "Bring her in at 9, Dr. Rodriguez said. "I'll see her first thing." The 2-hour wait felt like an eternity. Emma sat at the kitchen table, barely touching the toast Sarah had made her, while Charlie remained glued to her side, his head resting on her lap. Tom had already called his office to say he wouldn't be in. Nobody said the word they were all thinking. Cancer. It hung in the air between them, unspoken but heavy. "It's probably nothing," Tom kept saying, though his voice lacked conviction. "Kids get lumps, growing pains, swollen glands. It's probably just—" "Tom, stop," Sarah said quietly. "Just stop." The drive to Dr. Rodriguez's office was silent, except for Charlie's whining from the back seat. They'd tried to leave him home, but he'd become so agitated scratching at the door, howling, making sounds they'd never heard from him before, that they'd finally given in and brought him along. Dr. Rodriguez's office was nearly empty due to the pandemic. They were ushered directly into an examination room, where the doctor waited, already wearing her mask and gloves. Her dark eyes were kind but serious above the mask. "Tell me everything," she said. Sarah explained Charlie's behavior over the past few weeks, the pawing, the desperation, the specific fixation on one spot. Emma showed Dr. Rodriguez where the lump was. The doctor's face remained neutral as she carefully palpated the area, her fingers pressing gently but thoroughly. Emma watched Dr. Rodriguez's eyes. She saw something flicker there, a brief tightening around the corners, a subtle shift in expression that made Emma's stomach drop. "How long have you felt this, Emma?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, her voice carefully controlled. I just noticed it 2 nights ago. But Charlie's been acting weird for almost a month." Dr. Rodriguez sat back, removing her gloves slowly. She looked at Charlie, who was sitting perfectly still at Emma's feet, his eyes fixed on the doctor as if waiting for her to finally understand what he'd been trying to communicate. "I'm going to be very honest with you," Dr. Rodriguez said, directing her words to all 3 of them. What I'm feeling concerns me. The location, the consistency, the fact that it's firm and doesn't move freely. These are things I need to investigate immediately. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Tom's face went pale. What are you saying? Tom asked, though he clearly already knew. I'm saying we need imaging right away. I'm ordering an ultrasound and possibly a CT scan. And depending on what those show, we'll need a biopsy. Dr. Rodriguez paused, choosing her next words carefully. I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, but I also won't give you false reassurance. This needs to be taken very seriously. The next week passed in a blur of medical appointments that felt surreal against the Chi backdrop of a world shutting down due to COVID-19. The ultrasound showed a mass approximately 2 centimeters in diameter. The CT scan revealed it was solid, not fluid-filled, and showed characteristics that made the radiologist recommend an immediate biopsy. Through it all, Charlie never left Emma's side. The hospital staff, recognizing his role in the discovery, made special accommodations for him to stay with Emma during the waiting periods between tests. Nurses who saw him would stop and stroke his head. You're a special dog, they'd whisper. You knew, didn't you? The biopsy took place on April 15, 2020. Emma was sedated, and they removed a small tissue sample from the mass. Charlie waited in the parking lot with Tom, pacing back and forth, whining continuously until Emma emerged from the building 3 hours later. Then came the hardest part. Waiting for results. 3 days that felt like 3 years. On April 18th, Dr. Rodriguez called and asked them to come to her office. Not a video call, despite pandemic protocols. In person, that's when Sarah knew. When a doctor asks you to come in person during a pandemic, it's never good news. They sat in the same examination room as before. Dr. Rodriguez's eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying or hadn't slept. She sat down across from them and took a deep breath. The biopsy results came back, she began. I'm so very sorry. Emma has a malignant tumor. It's a rare form of pediatric sarcoma specifically, a soft tissue sarcoma of the chest wall. The words seemed to come from very far away. Sarah heard herself make a sound, not quite a scream, not quite a sob. Tom's hand gripped the armrest of his chair so hard, his knuckles turned white. Emma, sitting between her parents with Charlie's head in her lap, felt the world tilt sideways. Is she going to die? Emma asked, her voice small and clear and terrifying in its directness. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, and despite her mask, they could see the emotion in her eyes. No, sweetheart. We caught it early, remarkably early. And that's the good news in all of this. She pulled up images on her computer screen. See this? The tumor is contained. It hasn't spread to your lymph nodes or other organs. If we'd found this 3 months from now. She paused, seeming to struggle with her words. The outcome would have been very different. Much more complicated, possibly. She couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah's hand found Charlie's head, stroking him as tears poured down her face. Charlie saved her life. Yes, Dr. Rodriguez said simply. Yes, he did. She explained what would happen next. Emma would need to see a pediatric oncologist at Oregon Health and Science University. Treatment would likely involve chemotherapy, possibly radiation, maybe surgery, depending on how the tumor responded. It would be hard. It would be scary. But the prognosis, because they'd caught it so early, was good. Dogs have an incredible sense of smell, Dr. Rodriguez explained. Their olfactory system is 10,000 to 100,000 times more sensitive than ours. They can detect chemical changes in the body, including the volatile, organic compounds that cancer cells produce long before any symptoms appear or any test would reveal them. She looked at Charlie, who was watching her intently. Your dog detected something wrong, probably weeks before the tumor was large enough to feel. He was trying to tell you. He was trying to save you. Tom spoke for the first time since they'd sat down. His voice choked. We almost ignored him. We thought he was just stressed about the pandemic. We almost took him to a behaviorist to fix him. But you didn't, Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. You listened. Not as quickly as he wanted, but you listened. And that's what matters. As they left the office with referral papers and appointment schedules and information packets about pediatric cancer, Emma knelt down on the sidewalk and wrapped her arms around Charlie's neck. She buried her face in his fur and cried, from fear, from gratitude, from love so overwhelming it hurt. You saved me, she whispered. I saved you from that alley, and now you saved me. We're even. But Charlie licked her face as if to say, we'll never be even. We're family. And family protects each other, no matter what. That night, as Emma lay in bed trying to process the fact that she had cancer, something that happened to other people, not to 10-year-old girls who just wanted to finish 4th grade and play with their dog, Charlie positioned himself next to her, exactly as he always did. But this time, Emma understood. His weight wasn't just comforting. It was protective. His presence wasn't just loyal. It was life-saving. He had been guarding her, warning her, fighting for her in the only way he knew how. I'm scared, Charlie, Emma whispered into the darkness. Charlie pressed closer, his steady heartbeat against her side, his warm breath on her skin. And somehow, even with the terrifying road ahead, even with the word cancer now part of her reality, Emma felt a small spark of courage. If Charlie could survive being abandoned, starved, and left to die in an alley, and come through it with enough love to save her life, then maybe, just maybe she could survive this too. They'd saved each other once. Now they'd have to save each other again. The battle was just beginning, but they wouldn't face it alone. They'd face it together, the way they faced everything. The little girl and the dog who refused to give up on her no matter what. The Pediatric Oncology Wing at Oregon Health and Science University was nothing like Emma had imagined. She'd pictured dark, depressing hallways and sad children with no hair. Instead, the walls were painted with bright murals of underwater scenes and outer space. There was a playroom with video games and books. And yes, there were children without hair. But many of them were smiling, playing, living, not just existing. Dr. Patricia Williams, Emma's oncologist, was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kindest eyes Emma had ever seen. During their first meeting on April 22nd, she sat down at Emma's level and spoke directly to her, not over her head to her parents. I'm not going to lie to you, Emma. This is going to be really hard, Dr. Williams said, her voice gentle but honest. Chemotherapy is tough. You're going to feel sick. You're going to lose your hair. There will be days when you don't want to get out of bed. But here's what I want you to know. You're strong. You caught this early. And we're going to fight this together. Emma's first chemotherapy session was scheduled for April 28, 2020. The night before, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling Charlie's steady weight against her side. Her mind raced with questions and fears. What would it feel like? Would it hurt? Would she throw up? Would her hair really fall out? At 2 a.m., she felt Charlie shift. He climbed up further on her bed until he was lying directly beside her, his face inches from hers. In the dim glow of her nightlight, Emma could see his eyes watching her with an intensity that seemed almost human. I'm really scared, Charlie, she whispered. Charlie licked her nose once, then rested his paw over her heart, the way he always did when she was anxious. His message was clear. I'm here. You're not alone. We've got this. The next morning, Sarah and Tom prepared for the hospital visit with forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask their terror. But when they asked Emma if she was ready, she surprised them by nodding calmly, her hand buried in Charlie's fur. "Can Charlie come?" Emma asked. Dr. Williams had already approved it. She'd seen too many children struggle through treatment to deny them any source of comfort, pandemic protocols or not. So Charlie, wearing a special vest that identified him as a medical support animal, walked into the oncology wing beside Emma like a small, furry guardian angel. The chemotherapy room had several recliners where children sat hooked up to 4 poles. Emma was given a chair by the window. As the nurse, a warm woman named Jackie, with purple scrubs covered in cartoon dogs, inserted the 4-line, Emma squeezed her eyes shut and gripped Charlie's fur so tightly that the dog let out a small grunt. But he didn't pull away. He pressed closer. "You've got a special friend there," Jackie said softly, stroking Charlie's head as she adjusted Emma's fur. "He knows you need him." The first session lasted 4 hours. Emma watched the clear liquid drip from the bag through the tube and into her arm, imagining it as an army of tiny soldiers marching through her body to fight the bad cells. Charlie never left her side, his head resting on her lap the entire time. The side effects hit that evening. Emma barely made it home before the nausea overwhelmed her. She spent the night vomiting while Sarah held her hair back and cried silently. Tom paced the hallway, feeling helpless and furious at a disease he couldn't fight for his daughter. And Charlie refused to leave the bathroom, lying on the cold tile floor beside Emma, his presence a constant comfort even in her misery. "Good boy, Charlie," Emma whispered weakly between bouts of sickness. "Such a good boy." The next few weeks were brutal. Emma had chemotherapy every 2 weeks, and each session left her weaker than the last. She developed sores in her mouth that made eating painful. Food tasted like metal. The smell of cooking made her nauseous. She lost 12 pounds from her already small frame. And then, on the morning of May 15th, it happened. Emma woke up to find clumps of her dark brown hair on her pillow. She touched her head, and more hair came away in her hands. She stared at it, her heart pounding, feeling the sting of tears. "Mom!" Her voice cracked with panic. Sarah came running, saw the hair in Emma's hands and on the pillow, and her face crumpled. But she forced a smile, sat down beside her daughter, and said words she'd prepared for this moment. "Hair grows back, sweetheart. It's just hair. You're still you underneath." But Emma ran to the bathroom mirror and stared at her reflection as more hair fell away with each touch. She looked sick. She looked like a cancer patient. She looked like everything she was afraid of becoming. She sank to the bathroom floor and sobbed ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. All the fear and pain and unfairness of being 10 years old with cancer came pouring out. Then she felt Charlie's weight pressing against her. He'd squeezed through the barely open bathroom door and positioned himself in front of her. He licked the tears from her cheeks, then did something extraordinary. He took the hem of her pajama top gently in his mouth and tugged, trying to pull her up. When Emma didn't move, Charlie persisted. He nudged her with his nose, licked her face again, and made a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a bark. It was the sound he made when he wanted her to follow him. "What is it, boy?" Emma asked through her tears. Charlie tugged again, more insistently. Finally, Emma stood on shaky legs and followed him. He led her back to her bedroom, jumped on her bed, and pawed at something. Emma's favorite book, Where the Red Fern Grows, the one she'd read to him over and over during his recovery at the veterinary clinic. The message was clear. Remember when I was the one who was sick and scared? Remember when you stayed with me every day and read to me and told me I'd be okay? Remember when you saved me? Now it was his turn to save her. Emma climbed onto the bed beside Charlie and opened the book. Her voice was weak and shaky at first, but as she read, it grew steadier. Charlie rested his head in her lap, his eyes half closed, listening just like he had all those months ago when he was the broken one. When Sarah checked on them an hour later, she found them exactly like that, Emma reading aloud, Charlie listening, both of them finding strength in the rhythm of words and the warmth of each other's presence. The next day, Sarah helped Emma shave her head completely. It was easier to take control of it than to watch it fall out in clumps. Emma cried again, but less this time. And when it was done, Charlie sniffed her bare head, licked it once, and then rested his chin on top of it as if to say, "You're still my Emma, still my person, still beautiful." The chemotherapy continued through the spring and summer of 2020. 8 sessions total, spread over 4 months. Each one was harder than the last. But each time, Charlie was there. He learned the schedule, became anxious the day before each treatment, and would position himself between Emma and the door as if trying to protect her from having to go. Other families in the oncology wing noticed. Parents would point Charlie out to their own children. "See that dog? He saved that little girl's life. He's a hero." Dr. Williams noticed too. On days when Emma's blood counts were too low and she felt too weak to even sit up, Charlie's presence seemed to give her the strength to endure. The medical staff began documenting what they called the Charlie effect. Emma's vital signs were measurably calmer when the dog was present. Her pain tolerance was higher, and her emotional resilience was remarkable for a child her age. "He's better than any medication we have," Dr. Williams told Sarah one day, watching Emma sleep in a hospital bed with Charlie curled protectively beside her. "That dog is genuinely helping her heal." June became July, and July became August. Emma's hair didn't grow back, but her spirit began to return in small ways. She started drawing again pictures of her and Charlie, of the day she found him, of them fighting cancer together. She started a journal that Dr. Williams had suggested, writing letters to her future self about what she was learning, what she was feeling, how Charlie made each day bearable. One entry, dated August 3rd, 2020, read, "Today was really hard. I threw up 6 times, and Mom cried when she thought I couldn't hear her. But Charlie stayed with me the whole time. He didn't care that I'm bald, or that I smell like medicine, or that I'm too weak to play with him anymore. He just loves me anyway. I think that's what real love is, staying, even when things are really, really hard." By late August, Emma had completed 6 of her 8 chemotherapy sessions. The latest scans showed the tumor was shrinking. Not gone, but smaller. Responding to treatment, Dr. Williams's cautious optimism began to grow into something more hopeful. "You're doing beautifully, Emma," she said during a checkup. "Your body is fighting hard. Just 2 more sessions." Emma looked at Charlie, who was lying at her feet as always, his graying muzzle resting on his paws. "We're fighting hard," she corrected. "Me and Charlie together." Dr. Williams smiled. "Yes, you and Charlie together. The best team I've ever seen." December 18th, 2020, would forever be etched in Emma's memory as the day everything changed. She sat in Dr. Williams's office, flanked by her parents, with Charlie's head resting heavily in her lap. The dog seemed to sense the importance of this appointment. He'd been unusually calm all morning. As if he already knew what the doctor was going to say, Dr. Williams walked in holding a manila folder, and for the first time in 8 months, she was smiling, really smiling, not the careful, professional smile of a doctor managing expectations. She sat down across from them and opened the folder, revealing scan images that meant nothing to Emma, but everything to her parents. "Emma," Dr. Williams said, her voice thick with emotion, "you're in remission. The tumor is gone. Completely gone. Your scans are clear. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The words seemed to hang in the air, too good to be true, too precious to fully believe. Then Sarah let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and suddenly the room exploded into tears and hugs and laughter. Tom pulled both his wife and daughter into his arms, his shoulders shaking. Emma buried her face in Charlie's fur, feeling the dog's tail wagging so hard his entire body wiggled. "Are you sure?" Emma asked, her voice muffled against Charlie's neck. "Really, really sure." "Really, really sure," Dr. Williams confirmed, wiping her own eyes. "You did it, sweetheart. You beat it." Charlie barked once sharp and joyful, as if he'd been waiting to celebrate too. He jumped up, put his paws on Emma's shoulders, and licked her bare head enthusiastically, making her laugh for the first time in weeks. That Christmas was the most meaningful celebration the Matthews family had ever experienced. Emma wore a bright red beanie to cover her still bald head, and under the tree was a gift that made her cry a framed photograph Sarah had taken during treatment. It showed Emma asleep in a hospital chair, with Charlie curled protectively around her, his head resting on her chest, right where the tumor had been. The caption Sarah had written read, "The girl who saved the dog. The dog who saved the girl." But as the new year arrived, and Emma began the slow process of physical recovery, regaining weight, rebuilding strength, waiting for her hair to grow back, she realized something important. Surviving wasn't enough. She needed her struggle to mean something. She needed Charlie's miracle to help others. "Mom, Dad," Emma announced one January evening at dinner, "I want to start a nonprofit." Tom nearly choked on his water. "A what now?" "A nonprofit organization. To help rescue dogs get adopted, and to teach people about cancer-detecting dogs." Emma's voice was steady, filled with a determination that reminded Sarah of the day she'd carried Charlie home from that alley. "Charlie saved my life, but how many other Charlies are out there in shelters, waiting for someone to give them a chance? And how many kids might have cancer right now, and their dogs are trying to tell them, but nobody's listening?" Sarah and Tom exchanged glances. Their daughter was 11 years old, barely out of treatment, and wanted to start a nonprofit. It was ambitious. It was probably crazy. It was absolutely, perfectly Emma. "Okay," Sarah said simply. "Let's do it." Over the next 3 months, Charlie's Champions was born. With her parents' help, Emma filed the paperwork, created a mission statement, and designed a logo featuring a dog with a superhero cape. Her story had already spread through the local news during her treatment, so when she announced the organization, the community response was overwhelming. Emma's first official act was to return to Riverside Elementary School in March 2021, nearly a year after her diagnosis. She was still thin, her hair just starting to grow back in soft brown fuzz, but she walked through those school doors with Charlie by her side and her head held high. Her classmates had made welcome back signs, but Emma noticed some of them staring at her changed appearance, whispering. That's when she did something brave. She stood up in front of her entire 4th grade class and told her story, all of it. Finding Charlie in the alley, his desperate attempts to warn her, the cancer diagnosis, the brutal treatment, and how the dog nobody wanted had become the hero who saved her life. Charlie was thrown away like he was trash, Emma told her classmates, her voice unwavering. But he saved my life. So next time you hear about a shelter dog or a stray, remember, you're not just saving them. Maybe, someday, they'll save you too. There wasn't a dry eye in the classroom, including the teachers. Mrs. Patterson, her former 3rd grade teacher and Animal Welfare Club advisor, approached Emma after school. Would you be willing to speak to other classes? Other schools? I think people need to hear this. Emma looked down at Charlie, who gazed back at her with those wise, soulful eyes. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what I want to do." And so began Emma's mission. She started small, speaking at school assemblies and local community centers, always with Charlie at her side. She created pamphlets about the warning signs Charlie had shown and distributed them to veterinary clinics. She partnered with the Portland Animal Shelter to host adoption events where she'd share her story. And families who'd been on the fence about adopting would look at the shelter dogs with new eyes. What if that dog could save my child's life someday? One mother asked, staring at a 3-legged pit bull mix nobody wanted. "Exactly," Emma said softly. "What if?" By spring 2021, Charlie's Champions had facilitated 43 adoptions. Local news stations started calling. Then regional stations. Emma appeared on Portland's morning show, Charlie sitting proudly beside her in his vest, and told their story to thousands of viewers. The segment went viral on social media. The comments poured in. "My dog has been acting weird around my husband's leg. Because of this story, we're getting it checked out. We just adopted a senior dog from the shelter because of Emma's message. This made me cry. What an incredible little girl, and an amazing dog." But the message that affected Emma most came through the Charlie's Champions website. It was from a woman named Jennifer in Seattle. "My daughter is 8. Her dog wouldn't stop pawing at her stomach for weeks. I remembered your story from the news. I took her to the doctor. They found a tumor on her kidney stage 1, highly treatable because we caught it early. Your story saved my daughter's life. Thank you doesn't seem like enough." Emma read that message 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before showing it to her parents. "Mom, Dad, this is why. This is why everything happened." Sarah hugged her daughter tightly. "You took something terrible and made it better. I'm so proud of you." By summer 2021, Emma's hair had grown back enough that she no longer needed to wear hats, though she often did anyway. Charlie's Champions beanies she designed, with proceeds going to pediatric cancer research. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost, her energy had returned, and her regular scans continued to come back clear. But more than her physical recovery, Emma had discovered something powerful: purpose. She'd learned that suffering doesn't have to be meaningless, that survival can be transformed into service, that one girl and one dog could start a ripple that spread far beyond what they could imagine. She was invited to speak at a veterinary conference about Charlie's early detection. She was interviewed for a podcast about childhood cancer survivors. She testified before the Portland City Council in support of increased funding for animal shelters, and the council members listened to every word, several of them openly emotional. "When I was in that alley and I saw Charlie," Emma told the council members, "I didn't know I was saving my own life. I just knew he needed help. That's what rescue is, helping because it's right, not because of what you might get back. But sometimes the universe has a way of balancing things out." Charlie's Champions ended 2021 having facilitated 127 rescue dog adoptions and raising $23,000 for cancer research and shelter support. But the numbers didn't capture the real impact: the families who paid attention to their pets, unusual behavior, and caught illnesses early. The shelter dogs who found homes because someone remembered Emma's story. The children fighting cancer who heard about Charlie and found hope. Emma turned 12 that October, celebrating 2 years since she'd found Charlie and 1 year since she'd been declared cancer-free. At her birthday party, surrounded by friends and family, she made a wish as she blew out her candles. Not for herself. She'd learned that the best wishes were for others. She wished that every shelter dog would find their Emma, and that every sick child would have their Charlie. As the candles went out, Charlie barked once and wagged his tail, as if to say, "That's my girl. That's my purpose-driven, world-changing miracle of a girl." The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning to reveal its full meaning. October 15th, 2023. Exactly 4 years since Emma had found Charlie in that rainy alley behind Franklin Street. Now 13 years old, Emma stood backstage at Portland's Civic Auditorium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the collar on Charlie's vest. The auditorium seated over 3,000 people, and every seat was filled. "You nervous, girl?" asked the event coordinator, a kind woman named Patricia. Emma looked down at Charlie, now 7 years old, his muzzle showing distinguished gray fur that made him look wise and gentle. He gazed back at her with those same soulful brown eyes that had looked up at her from behind a dumpster 4 years ago, and she felt her anxiety settle. "No," Emma said, smiling. "I've got Charlie. I'm never nervous when I have Charlie." Tonight was the Governor's Youth Hero Award ceremony, and Emma was one of 5 young people being honored for outstanding community service. But as she waited for her name to be called, Emma wasn't thinking about the award. She was thinking about the journey, the incredible, impossible, miraculous journey that had brought them here. 4 years ago, she'd been a shy, anxious 9-year-old afraid of her own shadow. Now she was a confident advocate who'd spoken to thousands of people, appeared on national television, and created a movement that had spread across the entire Pacific Northwest. The statistics were staggering. Charlie's Champions had facilitated 312 rescue dog adoptions. They'd raised $94,000 for pediatric cancer research and animal welfare programs. Emma had spoken at 47 schools, 12 veterinary conferences, and countless community events. Her story had been featured in national magazines, morning talk shows, and even a documentary about cancer-detecting dogs. But the numbers Emma treasured most were the ones that couldn't be easily quantified. The letters and emails that arrived weekly at the Charlie's Champions website. Stories from families whose lives had been changed, sometimes saved, by the message she shared. There was Marcus from Sacramento, whose German shepherd wouldn't stop pawing at his father's back. They discovered a malignant melanoma, stage 2, caught early enough to treat successfully. There was the Chun family from Eugene, who adopted a senior beagle named Buddy from a shelter after hearing Emma speak at their daughter's school. 3 months later, Buddy detected their mother's breast cancer before any mammogram would have found it. There was 8-year-old Sophia from Tacoma, currently fighting leukemia, who'd written to Emma, "When I feel like giving up, my mom shows me pictures of you and Charlie. If you can beat cancer, then I can too. Thank you for being brave, so I can be brave." Each story reminded Emma why she'd turned her pain into purpose, why she continued to share her story, even when it was hard to relive those dark days. Why Charlie's miracle needed to be the world's miracle. Emma Matthews. The announcer's voice boomed through the auditorium. Please welcome this year's recipient of the Governor's Youth Hero Award for Community Service and Advocacy. Emma walked onto that massive stage, Charlie trotting proudly beside her, and was met with a standing ovation that seemed to shake the building. 3,000 people on their feet, applauding a 13-year-old girl and a scruffy rescue dog who'd proven that love could conquer anything. The governor herself, a dignified woman with kind eyes, placed the medal around Emma's neck and shook her hand. "You are an inspiration to this entire state," she said. "What you've built from your adversity is remarkable." Emma approached the microphone, looking out at the sea of faces. She saw her parents in the front row, both crying. She saw Dr. Williams, who'd flown in specially for the ceremony. She saw Dr. Chun from the veterinary clinic where Charlie had recovered. She saw classmates, teachers, volunteers from Charlie's Champions, and families who'd adopted dogs because of her story. And she saw something else. Dozens of people with dogs. Service dogs, therapy dogs, rescue dogs wearing vests. Dogs who'd been saved and were now saving others. Her vision had spread beyond anything she'd imagined. 4 years ago today, Emma began, her voice steady and clear, I found a dying dog in an alley. He was skinny, hurt, scared, and alone. Nobody wanted him. He'd been thrown away like garbage. And if I'd walked past that alley 10 seconds earlier or later, he would have died there. She paused, reaching down to stroke Charlie's head. But I didn't walk past. I stopped. I wrapped him in my favorite jacket, and I carried him home. And my parents, even though money was tight and dogs are expensive, and we'd always said no to pets, they said yes. They chose compassion over convenience. Emma's voice grew stronger. 8 months later, that unwanted dog saved my life. He detected my cancer before any doctor, any test, any scan could find it. If he hadn't been so desperate to warn us, if we hadn't finally listened, I wouldn't be standing here today. The doctor said I had maybe 2 or 3 more months before the cancer would have spread too far to treat effectively. She let that sink in, watching recognition dawn on faces throughout the audience. Here's what I've learned, Emma continued. Rescue isn't a one-way street. When we save them, we don't know it yet, but they're saving us too. Maybe not as dramatically as Charlie saved me, but in 1,000 small ways. They save us from loneliness, from depression, from forgetting what unconditional love feels like. They save us by giving us purpose, companionship, and a reason to be our best selves. Charlie, as if on cue, stood up and placed his paw on Emma's leg, that same gesture he'd used to alert her to the cancer, now transformed into their signature move of connection. Every dog in a shelter right now is a potential miracle waiting to happen, Emma said passionately. Every scared, unwanted, forgotten dog could be someone's Charlie, could be someone's hero, could save a life, change a family, or teach a child what real love means. She looked directly into the audience, making eye contact with as many people as she could. So my challenge to you tonight is this. Don't walk past the alley. Don't ignore the shelter dog that's been there for months. Don't assume that the older dog, or the scared dog, or the one with 3 legs can't be extraordinary. Because the most broken things often become the most beautiful. The most unwanted souls often have the most love to give. Emma's voice softened. Charlie was dying when I found him. And a year later, I was dying, and he found a way to save me. We rescued each other. And now, together, we're trying to create a world where every dog gets a chance, and every person understands that love, real, pure, unconditional love can come from the most unexpected places. The applause started before she even finished, building into a thunderous wave of emotion that rolled through the auditorium. People were on their feet again, many crying, some hugging their own dogs, others pulling out their phones to look up local shelter websites right then and there. As Emma walked off stage, medal around her neck and Charlie trotting beside her, a reporter from a national news network approached. Emma, what's next for you and Charlie's champions? Emma smiled, the kind of smile that came from a soul that had looked death in the face and chosen life, chosen purpose, chosen hope. We keep going. We keep telling our story until every shelter is empty and every family understands that. Rescue dogs aren't damaged, they're grateful. They're not broken, they're resilient. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're heroes waiting for their chance to shine. That night, as Emma lay in bed with Charlie curled beside her, older now, grayer, but still her guardian, still her protector, still her best friend, she reflected on the impossible journey they'd shared. From a rainy alley to a stage with the governor. From a dying stray to a certified medical alert dog. From a scared little girl to a confident young advocate changing lives across the country. We did good, Charlie, Emma whispered into the darkness, her hand resting on his soft fur. Grandpa Charlie would be so proud. Charlie's tail thumped twice against the mattress, and Emma felt his steady heartbeat under her palm, the same heartbeat that had calmed her through panic attacks. Through chemotherapy, through every hard moment of the past 4 years, in shelters across Portland that night, dogs slept in kennels, waiting for their chance. Their Emma, their miracle. And because of one girl's compassion and one dog's devotion, many of those dogs would get that chance, would find their families, would become heroes in ways big and small. The story that began in a rainy alley with an act of kindness had rippled outward, touching thousands of lives, saving dozens of them, and proving something profound, that we're all connected, that compassion matters, and that sometimes the life you save ends up saving you right back. Emma fell asleep that night with a smile on her face and hope in her heart, knowing that somewhere out there, another child was falling in love with another rescue dog. And maybe, just maybe, that dog would become someone's Charlie, someone's hero, someone's miracle. The legacy wasn't just about the past. It was about every future it would continue to shape, one rescued heart at a time. The end